Hey guys, Wild Willie here. And by the title, you can guess what we're going to talk about. When it comes down to food preparation, if you're one of those people, you're just concerned about 72, 96 hours when I do my courses and talk to people about food preps. They're surprised when I say, just pack shit. And what I mean is, I need canned soup, I need ramen noodles. No, if you're only worried about 72 to 96 hours, buy something you don't got to open up like that. Buy something you don't have to heat or keep cool. Buy your Cheese Whiz and crackers. Buy cookies, buy granola bars, buy chips, buy cured meats. Buy all that stuff. You can live off shit for 2 or 3 days, and it's comfort food, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you want more of the, prepare for 2, 3, 4 weeks in a month, then go into your canned stuff, go into your instant potatoes, the powdered stuff, go into, pancake mix, go into all that stuff. It's a long-term stuff. You want to be prepared for months, then you're going to get into your rices and your grains and your flour and all that stuff. And that's really what I want to talk about. Because when I do talk to those people about what I have and some of the things, when flour comes up about baking my own bread, and really, it's not that hard. It can be intimidating, and there's a lot to know. Depends how finicky and picky you want to be. But really, making bread takes 5 minutes to get ready, and it's idiot proof. I'm talking about the simple method with the simple ingredients. I'm talking about flour, I'm talking about water, I'm talking about salt, I'm talking about yeast. You can do it without yeast and get into the sourdough starters and all that other stuff, but no, you know what? I always keep flour in my preps. I always keep salt in my preps. We always have water in our preps, and I just keep, for $3, I'll keep a jar of instant yeast too. And that way I can pump out bread as much as I want according to my supplies and not have to worry about it. I make bread on a regular basis anyways. And when you do the math of what it costs you for everything, you're paying well under $1 a loaf for good bread with, 3 or 4 simple ingredients in it. You know what's in it. Not like when you go to the store, you're spending $2.50 on a bread and half the ingredients you can't read. So anyways, I'm going to show you with one hand, because I'm going to be filming this, how easy it is to make a simple homestead loaf of bread. Nothing fancy, very simple. I'm going to show you the ingredients, the measurements, and what I do to get it done, and from start to finish. Anyways, sit back and enjoy the ride. Okay guys, even simpler than this, I'm going to show you how to make this store-bought quality bread. Very simple to do. You don't even need a loaf pan. It doesn't even have to come out this shape. So follow me, let's go. Alright guys, welcome to my kitchen. Now this is how simple it is to make bread, okay? Well, I'm going to walk you through this step by step. We're not going to do anything fancy. We're not going to talk about sourdough starters. We're not going to talk about sandwich bread. We're just going to talk about a simple loaf of homestead bread. One of the most incredible tasting things ever. So, all you need, guys, a mixing bowl. I wish I had a bigger mixing bowl so I could do more than one loaf at a time, but this is all I got right now. So, I got a glass mixing bowl. In this bowl here, 3 cups of flour. 1, 2, 3 cups. Now, you don't have to use Best for Bread flour. This is an all-purpose flour I have in here. That's all I need. 3 cups of all-purpose flour. Really, you could use any flour you wanted, but all-purpose flour is what I have, and all-purpose flour is what I'm using. 1.5 to 2 teaspoons of salt. I like 1 big heaping teaspoon. It's about 1.5. That's all. Iodized salt, kosher salt, whatever you want. That happens to be iodized salt. I use iodized salt for cooking. I use kosher salt for eating, blah, blah, blah. So that's it. Now the third ingredient, which is optional, but we're doing a quick man's no proofing bread here. We're not going to let it sit for 2 or 3 days, is active yeast. Basically, Mother Nature has yeast in the air, and we can do this without it, and it can sit, and it can ferment and do its thing, but we're going to give it a little bit of a push. And that's why we have this active yeast in here. I always keep it because I don't want to spend 2 or 3 days making bread. So you put in your 3 cups of flour, your 1.5 teaspoons of salt, and your yeast. I'm just giving it a little bit of a mix up here. Why? Because so the ingredients are all even in there. Good enough. So what's it been? 2 minutes so far. Last but not least, doesn't have to be hot water. Could be warm water. Could be cool water. I got 1.25 cup of water. That's going into the mix. That's all there is to it. Just normal tap water. That's all I'm using. My water's hard. I don't care. And now, you know what? I'm mixing up. Just gently. You want the water in there. You don't got to go crazy. You don't need a mixer. You don't need a blender. You don't need any of that stuff. I know I'm doing this with one hand. It's going to be a bit of a pain in the butt, but That's okay. You want to get it mixed up nice and good, scraping all the flour off the sides. Getting it there. Sometimes you got to get your hands in there, well, especially since I'm only doing it one hand. So, getting it in there, getting it mixed, getting the flour off. If you're finding yourself, you know what, this recipe is very forgiving. If you're finding yourself a little too much flour and it's not moist enough, then just wet your hands, pour a little tiny bit in there. What you want the dough is to be pliable, but not too sticky, but not too dry. There's kind of an in-between. That's all you want. Just mix it around. I'm going to wet my hand a little bit. Get a little bit extra liquid in there to help me with the flour. And that's it. We're pretty much done. Once this is mixed up, trying to get all the flour off the bottom and off the sides. Sticks to your hands, yeah, especially using one hand. It's a bit of a pain because I got to film this. That's it. I'm done. Now all I'm going to do is put saran wrap on this and let it sit for 8 to 24 hours. That's it. I'm going to show you in a second where I stick it to get it. You want it at, you know, ideal temperature for non-proofing to get this bread rise. You want it to rise to the dough to rise double in size. Ideally, around 80 degrees is perfect temperature to get this bread to rise before we can start baking it. My house is never going to sit at 80 degrees, so I'm not going to cover this up with saran wrap and set it on my counter. You could use a wet towel to cover it too. I'm going to put this in my oven. Now, there's people that have 100-watt light bulbs in their oven. They could close the oven door, turn on the light for 8 to 24 hours, and this bread will rise fine. I'm too cheap that way. I'm not going to use the Hydro. I'll show you what I do. Okay, guys, I won't keep my 100-watt light bulb on overnight, but I will do this. I saran wrap my dough. I just put it in the oven, and I lit a tea candle. This tea candle will go all night now, and in the morning, 9 hours, whenever I wake up, this dough will have risen to double its size, and then we'll deal with it tomorrow, and we'll be on our way to baking bread. Believe it or not, what we just did took less than 5 minutes, and that was the hardest part of baking a loaf of bread. Now we got to sit tight for 8 to 24 hours, let Mother Nature do her thing, and we'll bake some bread. Alright guys, it's the next morning. It's 6:30 in the morning, and our dough has basically doubled in size. Now, very simple from here, guys. I'm going to preheat the oven to 450 degrees. Our bread is going to bake for 30 minutes. But what I'm going to do in the meantime is I'm not even going to use a Dutch oven. I'm not going to use a bread pan. I'm not going to use any of that. So I'm just using this gold casserole dish. It's clean. It just looks a little dirty. I'm just throwing the bread in here. This bread's going to be for breakfast this morning. Now, depending on your vessel you're baking with, some of them heat up quickly, some of them don't. I know my Dutch oven, this here takes a while to heat up, so that's why I'm throwing it in the oven. I want it to be the same temperature as the oven when the bread goes in. So I'm just simply going to turn on the oven here, make it up to 450. And we're going to put the dish in and let it preheat, and that's it. So we're good that way. In the meantime, our dough here, I just cut off this saran wrap, get it off. Like I said, it's doubled in size. You can leave this anywhere from 8 to 24 hours. Doesn't have to be 8 hours on the money. It doesn't have to be 24 hours on the money. It could be anywhere there. You'll see our dough is bubbly, and it's gooey, and it's doubled in size. This is exactly what you want. This is exactly what we're looking for. All we're going to do now is, while we're waiting, give this dough a little stir, mix it up a little bit. I know it's hard to do, I'll just use my hands. It's easier to do with a knife. But all we're going to do is just wake this dough up, wake the yeast up, kind of get a little bit of the air out of it, a little bit. That's it. You don't need to this is a no-knead recipe, which means you don't got to fluff around with the dough. I'm just doing this, fold it over a couple of times, wake it up, and then we're just, you know what, I'm just going to cover it back up with a towel, and we're going to wait for the oven to preheat, and that's it. Our bread's ready to cook. So we'll get back to you in a second. Okay guys, 2 things real quick. I forgot earlier when I mentioned I was mixing the ingredients with the 3 cups of flour, 1.5 teaspoons of salt, 1/4 teaspoon of yeast. Instant yeast, has to be instant yeast, the quick rise instant stuff. So remember that. Anyways, my oven's preheated. My baking vessel is preheated. Now I don't have any of that spray on baking stuff to line the pan with, and chances are in an emergency situation I wouldn't have a lot of that stockpiled anyways, but what I do have is oil stocked. Vegetable oil, olive oil. You could put olive oil in the pan and grease it, but olive oil has a distinct taste, and it might be good with some breads like a focaccia or something like that, but I'm using plain old vegetable oil. I keep that on hand all the time. Why? Because, no, it's good to cook with, it's good for situations like this, and it's good for fuel for your homemade oil lamps. But even simpler, guys, instead of me trying to grease the pan down when it's hot, blah, 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 all I'm doing is I'm going to put a little dab of olive oil right in here, and I'm going to lightly coat my dough. That's all I'm doing. I'm going to coat the dough on the top, flip this over, and coat the dough on the bottom. Get olive oil all on the outside of my dough. That's all I'm going to do. And this way, not only will it go good in the pan, prevent the pan and everything sticking to the pan, but because I'm not using a lid, I'm not using a regular bake vessel, something with a lid, it'll prevent it from burning. So I'm going to need 2 hands for this, plop it out of the oven, we'll put it back in 450 degrees for 30 minutes, and I'll get back to you when it's done. Alright guys, 450 degrees at 30 minutes. Beautiful looking bread. When you tap on it, I like my bread very crunchy on the outside, but you can hear that hollow sound when you pick it up. It's still too hot, but if you tap on the back, you'll hear like a hollow sound. That means it's very light inside. A lot of air inside trapped in there, a lot of, not a lot of density. I like my bread denser. I like it, thicker on the inside. I like a heavy bread, especially when I'm eating like soups and stuff like that. This light stuff is really good for toasting, good for garlic bread, focaccia, that sort of stuff. But I prefer a heavy loaf. But regardless, I showed you literally less than 5 minutes of prep time. The longest part was waiting for the dough to rise, and that was it. Anyone can bake a loaf of bread. You can get into it and be very particular, become a science of it, and make 100 different types of bread using different formats. This is the simplest one. This is a hot loaf you can make in the morning and in the evening, throw on your table, cut it up with some nice butter, and it makes part of a great meal. Simple, easy, fast, cheap, and a heck of a lot healthier than buying a loaf of Wonder Bread off the shelf. Anyways, guys, I'm Wild Willie, and I gotta get trucking. Remember, it's not a question if the shit's gonna hit the fan, it's a question of when. So always be prepared.